Hello everyone, meet Jan. Jan is very upset from stumbling across a disturbing website when she was recently researching for her literature essay. In this video, I'm going to tell you about Jan's story and explain how her complaint would be handled under Schedule 5 of the Broadcasting Services Act. Jan is completing a book review on an international best-selling book called Doomsday, and during her web search she was led to a site called DIYdoomsday.com. This website allowed people from all over the world to share stories about the worst days of their life. Some stories contain sexually explicit narratives and photos. Other stories contain threats of violence against groups of society, such as charity workers. Some were just downright rude and said some really immoral things. One horrible story was about a day a man got his drugs stolen, and he even gave instructions on how to avoid getting your drug lab blown up. Jan is horrified that she could easily find such offensive content, and now she wants to lodge a complaint with ACMA. This content is hosted on an international website and does not have a connection with Australia. Therefore, the complaint will need to be made under Schedule 5 of the Broadcasting Services Act. For a complaint to be made, it needs to be in relation to prohibited or potentially prohibited content as provided for by Schedule 7 of the Act. The content on this website has not been classified by the Classifications Board and therefore could not really be prohibited content, but could be potentially prohibited content. Clause 21 provides that if there is a substantial likelihood that the content would be classed as prohibited content under Clause 20, then it is potentially prohibited content. It is quite likely that this content would be classified as refused classification, and therefore would likely be potentially prohibited content. The National Classification Guidelines provide that a refused classification is a publication which is immoral, promotes indecency, or is purposely debased or abuseful for the enjoyment of its readers. Considering the vulgar content on this website, let's say that for Jan's story, this is potentially prohibited content. Now that we have established that it is internationally hosted content and is potentially prohibited, what can ACMA do? Under Clause 40 of Schedule 5, ACMA is limited in the steps that it could possibly take. Firstly, if the nature of the content is sufficiently serious, the complaint could be passed on to the Australian Police, which could be likely here given the stories about drugs and the threats. Secondly, if there is a code or standard in relation to the content, ACMA can notify the Internet Service about this content and how it's treated under the scheme. In Jan's situation, as potentially prohibited content is provided for in the Content Services Code of 2008, ACMA can then give notice to the ISP, but that's all they can really do. In Australia, ISPs do not have an obligation to block content, so it is unlikely that this content would get taken down or blocked to Australian viewers. If there was no relevant industry code, ACMA could give notice to the ISPs to take reasonable steps to block the content. Sadly for Jan, because this is an internationally hosted site, there is only so much that ACMA can do, and it is unlikely that her complaint would result in the content being taken down or blocked. For now, stay away from that website and cheer up, Jan.